Afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Slay, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about lesson planning and the writing workshop. So what I'm going to do is begin with a little bit of review to connect the dots with some of the things that we've already covered in this course. Hopefully, let me just double check, but you should be seeing a screen right now that says, yes, it is. It's the writing workshop lesson planning. We're going to begin that unit with a little bit of writing that we have already, I've asked you to do. So let me do a little bit of review. First of all, we've already been talking about reading workshop, and we've been talking about guided reading, which is often associated with reading workshop. One of the things that I want you to recognize is that reading workshop is a structure for how you manage your reading instruction. It's not the content, it is not the end all. What it does is it has a familiar structure that allows you flexibility to be specific, to offer work time, and to provide students with time for you to be able to confer, to conference with them, and to teach them and individualize. This whole writing workshop or mini lesson whole structure really comes from Lucy Calkins way back when, and all of the writing workshop and reading workshop people that started way back in the 70s and 80s. And some of it's been a little bit misconstrued. So I have done a lot of reading and I want to make sure that you don't walk into your future classrooms with this skewed understanding of what workshopping is all about. If you think about it, you can workshop anything. You probably learned how to do a lot of things in a workshop atmosphere at home. You might have learned how to cook or sew or create something through a workshop environment because you have a master, somebody else who is a little bit more knowledgeable than you, working alongside you while they teach you a specific skill, you practice that skill, and then you go off and do it on your own. Well, that's what reading and writing workshop is all about. So here's the reader's workshop idea. You have a mini lesson. That's your apprenticeship. That's the more knowledgeable person teaching students what they need to do in that given day, according to whatever the standards are, the curriculum, whatever the student performances are showing that you need to teach. Students then move into that's about 15 minutes-ish. Students then move into a guided reading time where they might have buddy reading, independent reading, book clubs, reading with the teacher. There's your small group instruction. So there's lots of different things going on here in this larger period of time. And then they close up the whole workshop time with about 5 minutes or so, where they share maybe what they've learned, something they've written, something that has been an aha moment to close up your lesson cycle. Well, Jen Richardson uses this cycle of assessing. There should be an S on there. I think it's just not visible. Assess, decide, and let me make sure it's on there. That word doesn't look very good. There we go. Assess, decide, and guide. It's the same cycle. This is how she develops her instruction that she then puts into this workshop time. You've already seen some models of her working in this student reading time where she's working individually or in small groups. So there's your reading workshop structure that you've been learning how to do. Can you put the principles of the science of teaching reading in there? Absolutely, you can, because you can teach phonics, you can teach phonemic awareness, you can teach fundamental skills for reading during that small group time. And in fact, it's much more effective to do it in small groups. You saw examples of Jan Richardson doing it in small groups in some of the videos and some of the things that you've already reported out with in the presentations that you did. So absolutely, you can do fundamental teaching. What I would encourage you to do is to stay away from whole group teaching, except for that little teeny tiny mini lesson, which is what we're going to be talking about very shortly. So this is where I want to remind you of some slides that I already gave you earlier in the semester, and I'm bringing you back to this balancing of the literacy workshop. When we bring in the writing workshop, which again is that same workshopping atmosphere, You are balancing reading and writing interchangeably using literature, using text that students read with you. They read independently, they read in partners, and they use as mentor text to develop their writing. So here's that cycle. And you have all of these various things that we've talked about before, and we're going to try to practice some of those today. And so here's this piece right here that we're going to focus on mainly, and that's developing their skills and the craft of the writer through mini lessons. So it's where we learn what writers do. I want you to remember that all of this is founded around this thing called the writing process. Here's your process. You draft, you revise, you edit, and you publish. But notice that's a process. It's not a linear, it's written in a line, but it's not that simple. We don't always just draft and revise. We might draft, revise, and draft again. We might draft and revise and go back and get some more ideas and collect some new information. We might draft, revise, edit, and then start all over again and collect some more information because we weren't done, and eventually get to publishing and finally end up in reflection. So it's really not a linear process. And when you see teachers who teach the writing process as a one step, you do this first and you cannot move on until you do the next step, they're not really understanding this. And I probably was one of those teachers that had it very linear because I needed to be organized. But I've come to realize through my own writing that it isn't linear. You're in and out of these various different stages of writing in the process of thinking that we develop as writers. And how do we learn about it? By becoming also fluent readers. So here again is this model of the workshop. So look at it. It's a big cycle. It's a cycle. It's the workshop model, whether it's for reading or if it's for writing, it really doesn't matter. You start with, you have an opening. You start and you hook your kids, you get them excited about what you're going to do. You tell them what they're going to do or what project you've been doing, and you get their heads wrapped around the work of the day. You move into, and that's, notice how small it is. You move into a very extended work period. You might do a mini lesson up here in the opening, and then you move into the work period, and then you always close it up with something that says, hey, good job, we've done something, let's celebrate our work. What is something that you learned? Some teachers use an exit ticket, but don't use that as a cop-out to say, okay, you're done, leave, and just give me your paper. We do that because we run out of time and management maybe have gotten in our way. Close up that learning so kids really cement what it is that they have learned for the day. Here's something else that I pulled from the book. Let's see if I can make that a little bit bigger. This came from, I believe it came from our writing workshop. Yeah, our writing workshop book. And I want you to think, as I said, we're going to talk about the mini lesson. Think about it as about the writing process that I just described. It's cyclical. You go in and out and you're going around it all the time. Think about what you're going to do to fill your time for writing. Now, fill your time sounds like very broad, like I have to figure out what to do with all this stuff. Well, plan your time wisely so that kids are doing meaningful activities while you're also having time. What you want them to do is be engaged in something that furthers their learning, projects that they're working on, reading and writing activities that are authentic to their interests and your curriculum, while you then are having time to be able to work with small groups, because as I said, that's where the real teaching and the development comes. That's where you catch them before they move ahead and get lost. Plan wisely, be talking about the lesson plan, and then of course share your plan. You share your plan with your students. You let them know this is what we're doing today, and then of course feel free to be able to change your lesson according to what students are asking you to do. This is in the book, and I thought I'd just try to connect what we're learning and I'm talking about to the materials you have at hand. Something else that I wanted to show you is, again, another version. Let's see if I can make that one a little smaller. Another version of that writing workshop. Again, notice you start with this process of about 10 minutes of a mini lesson. You move into, notice how much longer the writing time is. Now, these are times that people try to or use to organize their day according to whatever schedule they've been told you have to fit. You have a 50-minute lesson, you have an hour, some people have a 90-minute lesson. I worked a lot with 90-minute lessons, so my time spans changed accordingly. So I often had a larger time for independent writing, but that's up to you. I sometimes spent too long on a mini lesson. I talk too much, you know that. So it might be more like 15 minutes, even 20 minutes sometimes. Although if we keep them too long, we lose them. You might do something in here that we call a mid-workshop interruption. Sometimes they're working and you need to change the pace. You might say, okay, boys and girls, you've been working very nicely in your centers, you've been working on your piece or whatever it is that you're doing, and you have taken a break from working in your small groups. You pull them back together to remind them of what it is that they're doing, to insert a new piece of information that you discovered while you were monitoring and said, oh, I need to redirect them. That might be a mid-workshop interruption. You might ask them to tell you something that they're learning as you then refocus them and then send them back into the right independent writing time. And then you always close up with that teacher share. Donald Gray calls that the author's chair, which I always had in my classroom. And it was a real physical chair. I had a special chair that I had in my room where students would come and sit in this moment of pride where they would write about, or they would read their piece or a piece of their piece. Sometimes I would do what's called a whip around. You're about to see something to that nature shortly, where you ask everyone to just pick a word, a phrase, a sentence that they did, and they repeat that word. They call it out as they're celebrating something that they wrote. But kids need to be recognized daily for their writing, and this becomes a big part of the structure of your class. And they know what to expect because it's a routine, and you do it all the time. So let's dive into what we mean to talk about with the structure of the mini lesson. First of all, this comes from a document that I've posted in D2L, and I was really intrigued. All of these materials are coming together. This comes from, as I mentioned, Lucy Calkins, writing workshop also. Now, our Schubitz book also uses this specific structure, which comes from pages 74 through 78. And basically, what what I'm trying to communicate to you is that the structure of the mini lesson has to have these four components. It needs to be predictable in its format so that you know how to plan and you can move in and out of it easily every single time, but your students know what to expect. They thrive on routine. So you need a component of connection, a component of teaching, of active engagement, and link. Now that's described in the book and it's described in the article, which I have posted in D2L. I also want to say that I know that Lucy Calkins is controversial. Her writing workshop structure is not controversial. What has become controversial is perhaps some of the what they might call loose ends that some people have perceived about how she teaches reading. That might be a little bit controversial, but I believe that she has also addressed that. So I don't want you to walk in thinking, oh, they're teaching me something that I'm not supposed to be learning anymore. The workshop structure is very much sound, and I actually checked with our Dr. Lowenstein to make sure that I am informing you correctly according to the science of teaching reading and such, and what we've been learning and what you will be confronted with in schools. So everything that I'm teaching you is aligned. It's all good practice, and workshopping is not out the window. Workshopping is still very strong pedagogy. The trick is for you to figure out how to manage it in your classroom, and that might take a little bit of time. So let me take you to what will be the lesson plan template that you are going to be, oops, I've got too many links and not the right one showing. Let me see what this, I was trying, yep, there it is. Okay, so the writing lesson plan template that you're going to be completing for your next piece of work is this. And I'm going to show you a completed one in just a minute. I'm going to skip all of this portion right here because I want you to see that here are the four components that I just described. connection, teach, active engagement, and link. All along the side, you're going to see the elements of a lesson plan that you're going to be asked to do when you are in internships. So I want you to see how these different styles or ways of approaching the same thing converge or overlap so that you don't get lost in understanding code. Oh, we didn't use that template. I've been asked to use a bazillion templates, lesson planning templates in my time. So they all are asking for basically the same thing. Notice also that this template kind of guides you with some language that you can use as you walk through the process of how you're developing your thinking for writing your lesson plan. So you start by making a connection. You're going to activate schema, which is basically build your background information or tap into your students' background knowledge before you begin your task. Then you move from there so that's part of hooking the reader and setting a purpose for reading. Then you move into the teaching element, which is very explicit. This is your explicit instruction, and you're going to model. This is your modeling and showing what it's going to look like. And then your active engagement is sometimes considered your guided practice because the kids are doing it, but you're still there to support them. So your guided practice can be the small whole group, which it's turn and talk something really quick, or it could be at your tables. It depends on how you want to be able to manage that. It could be small group there, but it's their turn to try it out. And then you're going to link it to, well, what are they going to do now? Why did they just learn it? See, you're kind of closing up that little, it's a mini lesson. So you're closing up that little loop and you're going to say, remember, this strategy is useful, important, something that we do as readers all the time. And then you can send them into their independent practice. So that's your lesson plan cycle right here. Activating schema, modeling instruction, guided practice, independent practice, and then your closing and your sharing time at the end, and maybe your assessment that's either formal or formative. We're not talking about a big test. We're talking about indicating how is it that you're going to find out what your students can know and do. This part up here is the template that just kind of gives you a framework for figuring out, what am I teaching? Well, here's the topic. Here's the standards you're going to type in. Here's the TEKS strand, which I will describe to you in a minute when we get to the TEKS guide. What is your learning objective? That's different than the TEKS. What are you going to use? Notice it says mentor text. You must have a mentor text. That is part of the writing workshop model. You have to have a mentor text. What's your rationale for doing this? And then what's the purpose of this lesson? So all of that is that pre-thinking that leads you into the steps of the lesson. So let me stop talking about that right now. And let's get started with something right here. Now, I want to emphasize here that, this lesson that I'm about to, the little mini part, is predicated on my assumption that you've already read this book. Now, I know many of you haven't because you just haven't. Well, in my classroom, I can't do my read alouds and make it a mini lesson because this book's going to take you probably 10 minutes to read. Well, there's your time right there. Plus, we use the same book over and over again throughout the week to teach various different things. I'm going to use it for a specific purpose in just a minute. So please take the time to read this book. Also, the writing that I asked you to do in D2L was something that we would have done before we move into this mini lesson. My writing workshop in when I was a middle school teacher and even a fourth and fifth grade and sixth grade teacher, I taught fifth and sixth grade for many years. When I taught those years, we always write. We had our writer's notebooks. We always started with writing before we moved into the lesson. So kids have something to work with. Or we pulled out an old piece of writing and we use that to revise to help us learn the craft of writing, which is what we're going to be doing. So I'm not going to play this for you right now. I'm going to dive into the lesson with a lot of assumptions. So and let me go back actually. I want to see back here in D2L. Well, absolutely. I'm sorry. I'm going to segue here. let me go up and I'll show you. See, this was the piece of writing that I created and I actually put into D2L, and I'll show you where I did that in discussions in a second. So I wrote about a time when I went to visit my grandparents, and my Uncle Johnny was a big part of my life there. So I wrote about that. Quick write, it didn't take me very long to come up with that. But my objective today, and I'm going to show you now in the actual lesson plan template that I actually created, is the topic of this mini lesson today is to elaborate. I'm going to use an elaboration strategy that we often call show, don't tell. You've probably heard that maybe in your lifetime. You hopefully will hear about it when you teach writing in schools. It is based on this TEKS. It's a third grade TEK. I know that because it says 3 here. So it's 310D, and it says that the student is expected to describe how the author's use of imagery, literal and figurative language such as simile, and sound devices such as onomatopoeia achieves a specific purpose. Well, we can't do all of that. I'm not going to use all of imagery, all literal and figurative devices. I'm just going to focus on sound devices and how they help the reader understand the text better. So this is going to come from the language arts strand called Authors, Purpose, and Craft. That's where so much of our writing instruction lies, is in exploring and discovering author's purpose and craft. I will show you in shortly after we finish with this, how you find those strands and what that looks like. So then I wrote an objective. My learning objective is based on my TEKS, but it also is going to tell me or helps me think about what I want my students to know and do. So this is my statement. It's one sentence usually. Students will use sound devices in their writing by revising a piece of narrative writing to show I should correct this, and elaborate ideas from the first draft. So that's why I have a first draft already written. We're going to talk about what sound devices are and how we find it in mentor text. I list my material, Saturdays and tea cakes, and I've already created an anchor chart because I wasn't able to, when I don't have an audience, do it in front of you. So therefore I have my chart paper listed and I have a rationale. Here is my thinking about why I'm doing this. Well, from a perspective of being a teacher educator, I said that pre-service teachers have been asking what is meant by author's craft. They do ask me all the time. A term found in our course readings, because author's craft is a strand in the TEKS, which focuses on specific writing skills that can make writing interesting and effective. Teachers often need to experience ways to elaborate their own writing so they can demonstrate the specific strategies for teaching students how to show what they mean and not to tell. So the point is, you will learn and get a better sense of how to teach writing because you're doing it and working through the steps with yourself. And we always, always want to write with our students, which is why I posted my little piece of writing already in the D2L discussion so that I can, my best effort to be able to write alongside you. So here is my mini lesson. And I'm actually going to try to get started. So I'm going to tell you here's our story. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been reading the story of this little boy. I don't know his name. I don't think his name ever comes out. I believe that because I heard Lester Laminack talk, I believe that this is actually him. So this is the author's memoir of a time that he remembers being with his grandmother. And he calls this book Saturdays and Tea Cakes. Well, this book is very, very descriptive, if you remember. There's a lot of wonderful pictures, but there's also a lot of very vivid language. And sometimes authors will use vivid language to help us visualize what we're reading, by hearing the sounds of the story, by seeing descriptive detail in the story. But we're just going to look at or examine the author's use of sound devices. And let's see what we can find when I try to go back and find certain pages. boys and girls, I am not going to read the whole book because we've already read this story. But notice that we did mark when we were reading certain things when I asked you to listen for some description. We marked many, many pages that had examples of some descriptive language that you can hear. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples as I go back, and I'm going to ask you to jot down in your writer's notebooks a few examples as I read a couple of pages to tell me what is it that you hear when the author writes. Remember here, he was running along, he was riding his bike. He rode his bike back in the 50s everywhere he would go. So here he is, he's riding his bike and he says, every Saturday I coasted down our long, steep drive, showing only enough to make the turn, slowly enough to make the turn onto Thompson Street and then onto Bell Mill Road. Pedal, 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 pedal past Mrs. Cofield's house. Pedal, pedal, pedal around the horse pasture and up the hill. Pedal, pedal, pedal past Mrs. Grace's Owens land or Miss Grace Owens house. What do you hear? I hear it too. I hear repetition. He keeps using that same word, pedal, but he's saying it pretty quickly. He's actually just probably zooming along, he's not out of breath. He's just riding his bike. He's pedaling along. And then he comes along and you'll continue that he's coasting down the road. And here you remember he is meeting the people in town and he stops at Chandler's at the gas station and everybody's talking because it's a very small and friendly town. And he says, my mother always said, you stop and look both ways when you get to Chandler's. I don't care if the light is green. I'll hear about it if you don't. Well, notice that in this book, that language was written in italics. It was dialogue. That was this author's way of writing the words that his mother would tell him. So that is something that we call dialogue. Is that something we can hear? Yes. You could have said, his mother said, make sure you look both ways before you cross the street. But that's not what she said. She really elaborated it and used the whole word and allowed us to almost hear her Southern accent. And then the story goes on and he's getting a little bit warm and a little bit tired. And so you find him resting under a tree here. And here he started talking about, here's that repetition again, pedal, 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 pedal across Ross Street. Then a left for a slow coast down behind the banks of Heflin, where I turned right onto Bedwell and whoosh, I zoomed down the hill as fast as I dared. What did you hear? Did you hear it? Whoosh. Well, whoosh, that is what we call onomatopoeia because it's the sound of his bicycle moving really, really fast as it's going down the hill. And so we had two things going on. We had repetition and we had onomatopoeia. And listen to what he does next. He says, pedal, pedal, dot, 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 pedal, up the next hill and left onto the street. It was a long stretch to Mrs. White's. I always stopped there to catch my breath on the shade of the old oak tree. Notice he said, I stopped to catch my breath. Well, he must be tired. And if you're going up the hill, aren't you pedaling a little bit harder? Please take a note and notice how the author is writing that. Notice the pedal is stretched out because he's trying to show the impact of of how it feels to be going up the hill. That is something else that we call onomatopoeia, but he keeps using that word pedal over and over again. So we get it. He is working hard on his bicycle. Well, remember, he finally gets to his grandma's house. He calls her Mama. And he says, every Saturday, Mama was there sitting on her old metal glider. Crack, crack, sipping a cup of red diamond coffee and waiting, just waiting for me and no one else, just me. So what did you hear? Did you hear the sound of her glider? We call that a rocking chair probably now, but that was the sound of her rocking chair. Probably old and probably rusty from age and time. And so there she is. They're in her kitchen table. Remember that? and they're talking about what they're going to be doing for the day. And then there's just tons and tons of dialogue. Come into this house and let us have a bite to eat. We best clear these dishes away and get that yard done before it gets too hot. Because he always, remember, he mowed the lawn for his grandma while they were visiting every Saturday. Let me put a little water on those ferns. You go on ahead to that to the car house. Car house. Have you ever heard of a car house? I think we call that a garage now. I'll be out directly. So he went on to just, that's more dialogue that he's put into the story. And here again, I see that that old glider is going creak, creak, crack. And so the story goes on, and they talk, and you can see that they're eating, and she made those tea cakes that they shared every Saturday. It looks like they lived in a really beautiful place. And so then I'm going to just really jump on ahead because there's even more dialogue and you can hear it. Are they ready, Mama? Because they've been baking. Not yet, buddy. Are they ready now, Mama? Not yet, buddy. Let's give it a little bit longer. Are they ready yet, Mama? I reckon it might be. And he goes on and he says, you better wait. They're gonna be mighty hot, but not just yet. And this story, let's see, there's still more dialogue. So I think what we found, boys and girls, that there's lots of different examples of dialogue, onomatopoeia, and repetition. And those were the devices, the author's craft that this author used, Lester Laminack used, to help him tell his story. So what I did, now that I'm moving back into talking to my adult students, is I created this anchor chart. Now, normally when I have a group of students around me, I create this chart with them. And I would have drawn, and I really tried hard to do that with you guys to try to figure out a way, but I was didn't have the tools that I needed to be able to do it unless maybe we had all been in a room together where we could have done a digital chart and you could have examined some of this text. But I decided to put it together for you just to reinforce some of the concepts that, and this is something I really want to be very explicit about. I want my students to walk away with examples. I want them to walk away with the academic language, knowing what we just learned. And I want them to understand the impact that these sound devices have on the reader, because that's part of the TEKS. So here's the examples, and I created this anchor chart that says, what do I hear? What does the text say? Pedal, pedal, pedal. What is it? It's repetition. And it creates a sense of rhythm that the boy is riding along easily. Another example we found is you stop and look both ways when you get to the Chandlers, and you heard us talk about that. Well, that's dialogue. I noticed I put it in italics, and this is him. This allows us to visualize that it exactly how his mother would be talking to him and how important that was in the day. But it also made a connection for me. That's another impact. I connected with my mom telling me how to be careful when I'm crossing the street. Here's that very long, elongated pedal, pedal, pedal that where he was going up the hill, and you could see how the author actually wrote it in with the dashes to make it sound really stretched out. Well, that's another sound device. It's onomatopoeia and repetition. So boys and girls, are you going to be able to do something similar where you bring in the sounds of the outside into your story to help it become more alive? So you get a sense that he is going tired of the hill. You can tell because of the way the author told it. Here's two more examples of onomatopoeia, the whoosh and the click clack. And I even gave you the context so that you make connections so that you can see that he's talking about going down the hill very fast. So he's whooshing. And then here you can see he was going up the hill to catch his breath. So that's long because he's breathing hard. And here you can tell, here's the dialogue between not just one person, but it's the dialogue between the grandma and the boy. I reckon I know a boy who likes something to eat, something sweet to eat, and I grinned. yes, ma'am, I reckon I do. And that's again dialogue. But here I get a sense, a feeling that's warm and comforting. And it reminds me of days with my grandma. And it reminds me also, makes me think I can hear the accent in the way these were written. So I know that this story probably took place in the South because of the way that the text is written. So ladies and gentlemen, moving back to adult land here, this is an anchor chart that I would have created with my students, and it would be in the room so that they have examples to look at. I'm reinforcing the academic vocabulary and the impact on the reader so that they make those connections. This is explicit and visual for them. And then what I'm going to do is send them off and say, and tell them, okay, now boys and girls, writers, or I should say authors, use various different kinds of sound devices. They're important to help us visualize and make the writing more vivid. So now I repeat what it is that we did and why we did it. And now I'm going to send them off to do their writing. And so your task is, but boys and girls, let's see, how did I actually write that? So there's my hook and all of this. And then I'm going to tell them to, what I'm going to ask you to do right now is to revise your writing with your partner. So in the classroom, they would probably have their writing with them, and I ask them to return to their writing and to find a spot where they can perhaps find a way to either add dialogue, repetition, or onomatopoeia. They have 3 devices to choose from, and I expect them to use at least one, if not all 3 in their writing. So let me show you, before you go off to do yours, how I actually did mine. So let's see, I'm going to go back to this other screen. And I took that same piece of writing and I copied and pasted it, and then I added to it. So here's what I added. And so I'm going to share this as if I were sharing it with my partner, but I'm modeling it for my students, and this is part of that lesson. When I was a little girl, I used to visit my grandparents and aunts and uncles in Mexico every summer. I need to take that out because that's a mistake. See, I am editing while I'm writing. That's that circular process. My mother worked, so I usually traveled, and that's misspelled probably. I traveled alone, and my Uncle Johnny would come pick me up at the airport. He always greeted me with arms wide open and big hugs. Well, that's what I wrote the first time. But then I thought, what would Uncle Johnny have said? And I actually could hear his voice in my head when I was writing and thought, I need to put that in there. So I wrote it, and it's actually in Spanish because that's how he would talk to me. And he'd say, Ay, Laurita, ven aquí, mi linda. And he'd explain loud enough for everyone in the airport to hear. So I tried to add some dialogue, but I was also trying to figure out how can I make his, maybe I could say he boomed out loud enough for everyone in the airport to hear. I remember that Uncle Johnny was a funny man. He loved to listen to music in his studio and to tease me. Once at breakfast, I asked him if I could have some more orange juice to drink. Please, Uncle Johnny, can I have a little bit more orange juice? I begged. That's what I would have said. I'm adding some dialogue. He would tease me by only filling my glass a little bit, and I kept having to ask for more juice. And then he clunked the glass pitcher back on the table. I've tried to put in a little bit of onomatopoeia, making the sound of what it sounded like maybe when he would flash that pitcher back on the table. And then I'd say, oh, please, please, can I have some more? I should probably put in some more because I kind of would sometimes be a little bit whiny. I pleaded again, and I just said whiny because I'm re-envisioning it. So while I think out loud and I write with my partner, sometimes new ideas come to me. So I would say, I pleaded again in a whiny voice. Oh, sure, he replied. And once more, he dripped only a few drops of juice into my glass. So I tried to make it vivid, and I tried to create some sense of what was going on so that you could see it. with some dialogue and a little bit of onomatopoeia. While he thought it was funny, and I thought it was funny for a little while, he usually ended up getting really frustrated. Then finally, glug, 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 he gave up and filled my glass to the top. I don't think I used very much repetition in this, but I did try to use dialogue to make the writing more real and to bring in some sound devices to help you hear some of the things that might have been going on that day when I was with my Uncle Johnny. So I'm going to take this whole new piece right here. I'm actually going to copy it right here. And I'm going to show you how you will type this, put this into D2L. So here you have our discussions. And you'll notice this is where mine is. Now you have to watch really carefully because this is tricky because we're actually working in adult land in D2L. So I'm going to click on my piece. You have to find yours. I'm going to click right here. And you will see here's my original piece of writing. And then I'm going to click right here where it says reply to thread. So I'm going to click on the reply to thread and I'm going to paste what I wrote. And then you can just say post. What you can also do is simply, you can take that out. You could go back and find what you wrote the first time and paste that in there, and then use these editing tools to be able to find your colors, or maybe you prefer purple, and then you can post your writing, your words. You can put in, he teased me by filling out a glass, and then finally it went glug, glug, and then you would be able to put, oh, this is what I added. So you can highlight that and you can put that in another color ink and save that. You can italicize it if you want. There's a lot, you can even bold it. You can do whatever it is that you want with that text so that we can see where your original piece of writing is and where your revisions are. So I'm going to actually cancel that because I'm going to post the other piece that I did earlier when I make this live on Thursday. So that's let me go back and see if there's anything else I want to show you. I think that's where this ends right here. As far as this lesson is concerned, there is one more thing I did want to show you, and that is called this thing called Teek's Guide. Let me show you how it works, because you're going to need this when you write your lesson plans. First of all, you will find it's linked in D2L, in D2L. It's called the Teek's Guide. It's written by TEA. You're going to find it's only English language arts. I'm going to do the English one, not the Spanish one. And I'm teaching 3rd grade, so I'm going to find my grade level. And then I'm going to say search. Then you'll see all of the TEKS for 3rd grade, but notice you can change and you can find other grade levels here, but you're going to find those strands. Remember I said you have to find out the ELA strand. So here's your developing foundational skills. This is going to be really heavy in your kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, and it gets smaller and smaller as you get up to towards 12th grade. Here's your comprehension skills in reading. And then you've got your response skills, which is something else that's very much tied to reading. Multiple genres, really, really important because we do reading instruction across multiple genres, and we do writing instruction across multiple genre. We read poetry, drama, narrative, expository, informational texts, all sorts of things. So those are your different genres. So we read them, study them, analyze them, learn how to read them, and then we use them also, we study them in order to be able to write in those genres. So you will find your different standards related to that here. And so you can even see that there's different skills related to them, such as being able to specifically in poetry, be able to look for sound devices in poetry. Well, we didn't do poetry, so I didn't pick that one. And then you move on to something called author's craft, which is the strand that I chose from. Here you're going to find a lot of the tools that authors use that you want to explicitly teach your students. And I picked, remember, 310D. So this is that use of figurative language and onomatopoeia to achieve a purpose. Don't forget to read the whole standard, because it's not just identifying it, but you're trying to accomplish something. Authors do things intentionally, and this is what we want our kids to know. They don't just write at random. Composition is another one of the writing strands that's really important, but this really goes into the grammar areas, and it goes into the different elements of the writing process. So if you're wanting to focus on grammar, such as using nouns and verb tense or prepositional phrases, this is the place that you will find your teaks. And then you got to scroll up, you've got inquiry and research. So if you're going to end up teaching something like social studies, you will benefit from being able to integrate your language arts instruction with your reading and writing instruction because of that inquiry and research strand. If you look at it closely, it shows you how to use other sources and to cite them correctly, how to create a research plan, because all of that is also part of reading and writing. So the other thing that I'm going to go backwards because I want to go show you one more thing. Where did it go? Here we go. I want to go to author's purpose and craft. I want to go back to this teak. When you click on it, please do pay attention. You've got your teaks is written right here. You can copy it from right here. But notice that if you just mouse over it, it gives you definitions. You're going to read a lot of language and words in our standards that you're going to gloss over. Some of it you'll know, some of it you won't, or you will forget about, or you need to really study it again because you actually have to teach it now. So this is really useful as you start to understand what these things mean and why they are important. What are you teaching in this? Here is something that we call the knowledge and skill statement. This is like the overarching statement that covers a lot of the different elements of authors' in this case, author's purpose and craft. And then notice how they say A, B, C, and D. Well, this one's D. That's only one small piece of the entire set of author's purpose and craft. Note, and then again, you can mouse over it to get more. You get an explanation if you listen to the video. Here's a glossary, which is really, really helpful. See, here we've got the teak that we were focused on. And a lot of time there's something in here. So I think that this is one of the best sites to use for helping you with lesson planning. There's many, many others, but to really understand, and you'll get those in your school districts. This is a great way for you to understand the teaks themselves. This goes into how things are aligned across grade levels, and you can see it's being highlighted here. So it shows you, well, what did they learn in reference to this standard in the year before, and what are they going to learn in the next year? So here you can see this is what they did in fourth grade, what they're going to do in fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, and this is what they should come to you in third grade already knowing. This is what they call vertical alignment, excuse me. Vertical alignment, which is very important to make sure that there's no gaps left in their learning. And then finally, here's more resources that they give you. So you've got, oh my gosh, they've really beefed this up. All the different, maybe some of these are textbooks that you learn and other resources that are found online. Collaborative Classroom's really, really cool, and it gives you lots of great tools. So I encourage you to explore this. Please use it for the lesson planning activity that you're about to do. I'm not going to go into that in this video because I think we've talked long enough. I just want you to practice that mini lesson and finish that up this week, because next week we're going to dive into doing our work together on the lesson plan. So enjoy. Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate you listening in. Bye-bye.